Today we're going to take a little time and try to answer the question, which is the better concealed carry weapon, a revolver or a semi-automatic? And that's really a widely debated topic. And a lot of times it deals with just the individual person. So we're just going to take a look at kind of what are the benefits of each one and talk about really depending on who you are and what you're using it for, which is the best tool for you. I'm going to start off by saying that the biggest differences between these two is obviously going to be the capacity. In a revolver, what you have is traditionally 6 rounds, whereas in a semi-automatic, sometimes you have 18 rounds, sometimes even more than that. But that makes a difference too. Having those extra rounds is very significant depending on what you're using it for. Most people, when they carry a concealed weapon, what they're using it for is defend themselves and defend their families. So what is the benefit of each one? Well, first of all, a revolver, when it comes to the size, yes, it's a 6-shot. However, you are dealing with a much smaller package. Traditionally, the handles are smaller, and the entire gun is typically smaller than most high-capacity semi-automatics. Now, if you're dealing with a smaller semi-automatic, then you're still going to be in that 6 or 7 round category, just like you are with the revolver. And once you get into the double stack, now you're getting more rounds, but you are getting a thicker package. So when it comes down to it, with a revolver, you have a small gun, big rounds, and traditionally in a semi-automatic, you have small guns, small rounds. And if you're going to use big rounds, you usually have a bigger gun. And that really is the benefit that you have in the revolver, is the actual rounds themselves. Traditionally, most revolvers that people are going to carry is going to be a .38 Special or a .357 Magnum, whereas in a semi-automatic, you're looking at .380s, 9mm, 40s, and 45s. Now, if you're going to use smaller rounds in a semi-automatic, like a .380 or 9, you can definitely get those in a smaller package. But you get into the .40 caliber or the .45, you're definitely going to need a bigger gun. So ammo is a very significant difference between these two guns. And whether or not you have high capacity or not is pretty significant as well. And generally speaking, high capacity guns are going to give you obviously more rounds to shoot, and you're going to have more opportunities to hit your target. However, a lot of people would argue that when you have simply a 6-shot, you're going to be a little more careful with where those shots are going. And personally, I think everybody should be careful. If they're going to be shooting, they should be careful on where their shots are going. Now, I've been in training exercises where I've seen people go through dozens and dozens of rounds rapidly and not really hit the target. And I've seen those same exercises with a different person just shooting 1 or 2 rounds and nailing the target. And that's a pretty significant, is you have to think about, well, what are you going to do? What is your reaction if you're going to use that weapon? If you're just trying and you're practicing to get the target with 1 or 2 shots and end the problem, versus taking dozens and dozens of rounds and rapid firing, that's a significant difference. Traditionally, revolvers are more concealable. They have a reduced grip diameter. And the more concealable semi-automatics tend to be tiny guns. Like I carry a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard that carries a .380, and I could carry 6+1 capacity. That gun is tiny. But I have 1 more round than I would in a revolver, but I have a much smaller round. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to get at. And those are the differences that you really need to think about. And often the saying goes, the right tool for the job depends on the person using the tool. If you're a better shot with a revolver, obviously a revolver is going to be better for you. You need to look at the question, what are you comfortable with? Which one can you shoot more accurately? Because ultimately it comes down to, what do you depend on? What is accurate for you and your shooting style? And those are questions that you need to answer specifically before you choose between a semi-automatic or a revolver. You also need to consider it if you're injured and you only have 1 hand. Obviously, a revolver is going to be easier, not just to shoot, but to load as well. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to load a magazine in a semi-automatic one-handed and also be able to rock a slide. Not impossible, but very difficult and close to impossible. One thing you also might consider, if this is a gun that you have sitting in a drawer that you're just going to leave there for months and months and months, which If you have kids, I definitely don't recommend, but a lot of people don't have kids in the house, and this is a reasonable thing, is just to leave it in the nightstand drawer. A revolver, you're not dealing with springs like you are in a magazine, and a revolver will allow you to keep those rounds in. You can leave them for 10 years and it'll still be just fine when you get there. I'd probably replace the rounds, but nothing's going to be wrong with your gun. Whereas in a semi-automatic, when you tense those springs, eventually what you're going to have is going to have feeding issues. I used to have a 45 1911 that I just keep loaded all the time, and I didn't shoot it for a couple years. And finally, when I got around to shooting it, it was having some major feed issues because of those magazines. That's obviously not a problem you want to have when you're dealing with a self-defense situation. I heard a story one time of somebody that was carrying a 1911 in the military, and then when they got out of the military, they carried a 1911 on themselves for many, many decades. And eventually what they got to was they had to have rotator cuff surgery on their strong arm. And they really lost that ability to maneuver and use and function the 1911, and they had to switch to a revolver because they were not only needing to load it and do some things without the use of their strong arm, but they were also shooting with their weak arm. And they grew more and more accurate with that gun as time went by, and to this day that person carries a revolver. So it's things like that that you really should consider. One other point I'd like to make is oftentimes a revolver is significantly easier for a first-time gun owner. Being a first-time gun owner, I still don't recommend that you don't practice, because if you're going to carry that gun, you need to practice. What I'm suggesting is that oftentimes when they're new at it, it's really hard to mess up a revolver. It's hard to not get it to work. Whereas in oftentimes, especially when you have a semi-automatic that has maybe a slide release and it has a magazine disconnect and maybe a safety, manual safety as well as a trigger safety, there's all sorts of stuff you can mess up, especially in a distressful situation. And oftentimes a revolver it's just real simple. You just pull and shoot and it's going to work every single time. And with that also being said, the great thing about a revolver is if you do have misfires, you just keep squeezing and the trigger's going to keep on pulling each time, where that's not necessarily the case with many semi-automatics out there. So really, again, it comes down to you and what you are experienced with and the injuries you might be suffering, or the age determination is often there as well. As time goes by, I can account as my age, I'm less capable of doing things I could do 20 years ago, and that's just the reality of the situation. A lot of times what you're choosing, whether you're deciding between a revolver or a semi-automatic, is really what can you do? What are you capable of doing? Is this a tool that you can use every time without problem? And is this a tool you feel comfortable with carrying and you feel comfortable with practicing? So I guess when it comes down to it, the tool for the job really depends on the person using the tool. I'm not going to suggest that a revolver or a semi-automatic is better for all cases. What I'm suggesting is that maybe a revolver is best for you, but maybe a semi-automatic is best for you. As for me personally, I like to carry both. I don't always carry a revolver and a semi-automatic at the same time, but I often carry a revolver and I often carry a semi-automatic. I'm very comfortable with both those because I've practiced with both of them many times. So I hope this video helps if you're looking to determine between one of those two options. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. You can also now find us at godfamilyandguns.org and on Facebook. And you can also now be a patron of this channel, and our Patreon link is below. But by far, the most important part of this YouTube channel is we take prayer requests, so please don't ever hesitate to send that stuff in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns, and as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.